All right, so let me just get set up here. All right, cool. Let's get started. Let me make sure I'm recording. All good. And can you just say something for a minute?
Hello.
Hello.
There you go.
Yeah, good stuff. All right, so let's get started. Hey, Dad, and welcome to another episode of the Wake Up Dad Show. On the show today, I've got a special guest. His name is Simon Santosha, and I think he's going to give massive value to you guys out there. Simon's the managing director of Men and Family Counselling and Consultancy on the Gold Coast. He's a clinical social worker and psychotherapist with more than 18 years' experience working with men and families dealing with relationship issues, separation, divorce, fathering, and co-parenting issues. He served on various boards which have been responsible for providing specialist advice to government around men and family relationship issues. He's also been instrumental in helping organizations through Australia develop best practice approaches to working with and engaging fathers. He is represented and presented at various state and national conferences and delivers professional development training to a range of government, non-government, private sector and communities throughout Australia. He's appeared on the ABC's Q&A program as a panellist and is often a spokesperson for men and family relationship issues in the media. So I'd like you to give a warm welcome, guys, all you dads out there, to Simon. How's it going tonight, Simon?
Oh, pretty good, Scott.
Excellent. So the dads out there got a little taste of who you are and what you do through the bio, but why don't you take us through what you do for dads specifically to help them just be better dads?
A lot of what I do is based on my own journey as a father and experience also as a counsellor and therapist. But I always wanted to do it differently than my dad. My dad was your typical provider father. So when I first had children, and I've got 3 children, 3 boys, I wanted to do it differently. So I dropped down to part-time work, and my wife at the time dropped down to 20 hours. I worked 20 hours, and we share-cared the load. So whoever was at home looked after the kids, did the housework, prepared the meals, and we kind of equally shared that. Because I grew up with a sense of Dad was a great provider, but he was never there. So I just wanted to do it a bit different and be there for my kids. Because the other thing too is I've been doing this work for about 18 years and working with guys, over 2,000 men in that time. And there's something that we all have in common, a lot of us have in common, and that's what I call the absent father syndrome or father hunger. A lot of us wanted more fathering. A lot of the adult men don't have good relationships with their dads and wanted good relationships with their dads. And I realised early on that being a dad was more than being a walking wallet, that we had a profound impact on our children's lives, whether we were there emotionally or emotionally available or emotionally unavailable. We impacted profoundly on their lives. So I wanted to do it a little bit differently.
That's such an important place to come from. Like we talk about the 5 Ps in our podcast here, purpose, power, parenting, providing, and passion. And I think that you would have so much more experience in this than me, but I think that even 1 or 2 generations ago, the providing seemed to be like the main part of being a dad. Like I can say the very same thing for myself. I found that he was the one out there providing for the family, but I feel like he wasn't around as much as I would have liked him to be. That absent father syndrome, which I've never heard of as a syndrome, but I reckon a lot of us, especially, I'm 40. Do you mind saying how old you are?
48.
Yeah, so in that sort of same category, I think a lot of fathers out there listening probably in the say 25 to 45, 50-year-old age group probably feel very, very similar to that. And back then, providing was it. But I think in today's world, we not only want to do more than that, it's sort of demanded of us in today's world, and what's expected of us as a dad is to really step up and do a lot more than just provide.
And the interesting thing is when I run new parent groups for men and women that have recently had a child, and I say to the guy, now that you're a dad, what do you see your role is? A lot of them will still say to provide. In fact, a lot of guys go into what's called provider stress, that the fact that I'm not on my own anymore, I've got a family and I've got to provide for that family. So they actually increase their working hours, a lot of guys, especially in those first 12 months to 2 years post-birth. Yet when you ask women, now that he's a new dad, what do you see his role? And a lot of the women now will say, I want him to provide, but he's got to look after me. He's got to care for the baby. He's got to change the nappy. He's got to be a hands-on dad. He's got to be my emotional companion. I want him to do the housework. And already at day one, there's a disconnect between what fathers see as their primary role and what mothers see the father's role as being. And when you work with couples, you can trace some of the early disconnection to the different expectations they have of their roles in the family.
It all comes down to expectations, doesn't it? Expectations and agreements. Maybe Absolutely. You want to elaborate on that a little bit more for the audience out there listening. What does that mean to you, and how would a dad out there that's maybe struggling with their, say, passion part of the 5 Ps because of the new dad situation and that disconnect that you talk about, how would expectations and agreements help somebody?
Well, the thing is, a lot of couples don't talk about their expectations. There's a lot of assumptions made in relationships where they don't actually talk about the different roles or what's going to happen, who's going to do what. And interestingly enough, the Australian Institute of Family Studies has done a lot of research on this, that the happiest couple will experience a period of disconnection from each other 2 years after the birth of each child. And that's generally put down to the woman, the mother, generally drops her work and takes over those primary caregiving responsibilities. The guy generally keeps his work and works more or harder because of the loss of income. And the loss of sleep in those early months, the financial stress, the changes to their relationships cause that disconnection. So they estimate that the average couple will increase their fighting up to 8 times after the birth of a child. So a lot of the emphasis now when you work with new parents is to help them argue respectfully and help them resolve conflict respectfully and start to talk about these different expectations rather than just make those assumptions and then react in a negative way when those assumptions aren't met.
You know, have you heard that old saying, when you assume, it makes an ass out of you and me?
Yes.
Yeah, I think that fits very, very well here. And that's a good point to make, argue respectfully, because I think there's a viewpoint out there in the world that, you know, great couples, they shouldn't argue, they don't fight. What's your perspective on that?
There's an American researcher called John Gottman that's done a lot of work on this, and he can tell within 8 minutes of listening to a couple fight whether they will eventually separate. And he calls it the four horsemen of apocalypse. If there's these 4 things, couples will eventually separate. If there's high levels of criticism in your fighting, if there's high levels of contempt, if there's high levels of stonewalling, then couples are more prone to argue and fight. Criticism, contempt, stonewalling, and and basically defensiveness, defending and attacking are the four primary causes of arguments spiraling out of control. So he argues, and the research bears this out, if you can teach couples to minimise those four things, criticism, contempt, defensiveness and stonewalling, and learn to do what's called repair attempts. All couples fight, and it's not the arguing in relationships that causes problems. It's the arguments never being resolved. So he talks about repair attempts, and I envisage repair attempts like a tyre rupture. So if you drive in a car and your tyre ruptures, the more you drive on it, the more damage there is. Couples that fight but don't resolve their fights fairly quickly, the damage becomes quite ingrained into the relationship. But if you can look at each other and do a simple repair attempt like, darling, I really care about you, this is crazy, let's just tone it down and we can sort this out later. Simple repair attempts like that can really resolve the fights and stop a lot of that long-term damage from occurring.
And so when you say, so there's criticism, contempt, stonewalling, and defensiveness.
Defensiveness, yep.
Now, as a bloke, as a man, could I be again right in assuming that the masculine energy in us, the men, we just want to help, and we just want to not fight, and the feminine energy is more free flowing and is a bit more ready to get into it. And so as an attempt to not fight, we can sort of stonewall, just to say, okay, well, I don't want to fight, so I'm just going to shut down, like do the shutdown thing as a man. And that's a thing that I hear with a lot of men out there, is that
Yep.
They shut down, and that's their way of fighting. So how does somebody who that's their way of dealing with things, because I think typically as men we probably do that a bit more, how does a dad get around that?
And John Gottman does argue that women will generally criticise and have contempt more often, and guys will stonewall and become defensive more often. But we all, in a fight, tend to do everything. But there is that gender balance. This goes back to how we're socialised as men. And the interesting thing on gender socialisation is little boys are actually born more sensitive to girls, but by the time we're 5 years old, we will show far less facial expressions and show less emotions. And while there's some gender differences that are hardwired, our capacity to feel and show our emotions and talk about our feelings or emotions is part of being human. But what happens when we hear stories, when we hear words, especially from our fathers, like stop crying or I give you something to cry about, toughen up, be a man, we quickly realise that those feelings are unacceptable. So we learn to shove them down. An 8-year-old boy on a playground who falls over and skins his knee and cries because it hurts, what does he get called? He gets called all sorts of names. So to protect himself, he'll put the masculine mask on, he'll pretend to be okay when he's not, and he'll learn to start to disconnect from those emotions. So stonewalling or isolating and disconnecting become part of a fallback, a safety, a survival strategy that a lot of us guys use very early on to protect ourselves from pain, especially if our partners come out with highly critical statements. So a lot of the work that I do with female partners is teach them the soften starter, so they don't come out so critical, so they praise the behaviour. It's funny, my wife calls it men's fragile ego, and I say, well, you weren't brought up being shamed, blamed, criticised or bashed if you showed any kind of emotion. And those simple words, be a man, toughen up, or stop crying, I'll give you something to cry about, have profound effect on how men share with their children. Getting back to the the fathering aspect of this, the more we are flexible with our sons, the more and daughters, the more we're able to share our emotions and be real with them, the higher literacy numeracy scores, the better outcomes socially. There's a lot of fathering research now that says the more emotionally available we are to our children, the better they will do socially. The more old school we are, the more disconnected we are, the more we father how we were fathered, especially those of us that were born in the 50s, 60s and 70s, then the more disconnected and the more unhappy and disconnected relationships we will have with our children, and the more likely that they'll have negative social scores. So it really is important that we find a way not to disconnect and not to isolate, but to be able to express what's going on for us in a way that doesn't either shut people down in front of us or shut them out.
So you use the words being more emotionally available for our kids. Can you give us like an example of that, or like a bit more of something concrete? Because I think I have an idea what that means, but I'd like to hear a little bit more about it.
So for a lot of us, we had no idea of our father's emotional life. My father would be 82 now. He died a couple of years ago, but he lived through World War II Germany and experienced horrendous atrocities. I didn't know. He didn't share any of that with me. And all I did was see his anger, but I didn't see the fears or the trauma. And now at 48, I often wonder what my dad's life was like at 48. What was he struggling with? And I had no idea. And I guess with my kids, I'm very conscious of that. So if I might come home, in a bad mood because I've had a bad day, and I might say something a bit harshly like, pick up your toys, I'm able to look at that, to own that and say, look, I didn't mean to speak to you like that. Daddy's just had a bad day at work. I do apologise for that. So I'm able to take ownership. I'm able to acknowledge that I've had a bad day, and I'm able to communicate with him in a respectful way. I'm able to say, well, Daddy feels a bit sad. Daddy feels a bit angry. And I'm able to acknowledge that, hey, I'm a man and I've got feelings, and it's okay to talk about those feelings. It's part of being human.
Yeah, that's such good advice. Just like that idea I was saying earlier with, seeing that there's this sort of fake perfect relationship out there that never fights, that's just not true. And I think there's like the fake dad out there that never gets angry at their kids for the wrong reason. Like, I think even more importantly is just calling yourself on it when you do those things that you're not happy about, and being able to apologize to your kids and not just have them apologize to you when they do something wrong.
Absolutely. There's an old story about the guy that gets told off at work, comes home and has an argument with the wife, who then yells at the oldest kid, who clips the youngest kid over their head, who then goes kicks the dog. It often goes down the line. None of that would have happened if the dad, before he came home, went, I've had a bad day, I think I'll go for a walk along the beach. I think I'll just sit in the car and take 3 deep breaths before I come home, and have some of that transition time to shake off all the work energy before I come home. I talk about the second shift. When we've got kids, especially young kids, we don't just have our day job, we have our night job too. And the night job doesn't finish until the kids are squared away in bed, their bath, their stories have been read, we've done dinner. It's about 9 o'clock, and both mum and dad fall in a heap exhausted. But when guys just come home and they don't put in the second shift, and they don't help their partners with the housework or with stories or bed or bath routines, not only does it cause resentment, the female partner, but their children miss out, because there's something really connecting and bonding by reading your child stories, and just the simple routines of bathing act to facilitate that connection and that father-child bonding. They're really important, and I don't think we realise that really.
So Is there a third shift?
The third shift is I think self-care and couples reconnecting when they can, or making time for each other is really, really important. And that reconnecting and communication.
Yeah, I think that the self-care part is really such a massive part that I want dads to get, is that, by being a better man, you're going to be a better dad.
Well, it's looking after yourself and understanding that relationships are complicated, or with our partner and our kids. If you understand relationships like a car, we just generally hop in the car, put the keys in the ignition and turn them, and just expect them to go. And relationships are a lot like that. We hop into them, have children, without much thought about how we're going to parent them, or hop into a relationship without much thought of how it's going to work in the long term, 10 or 20 years, with all the changes that occur. So everything is connected to everything else, just like a car. If one part stops working, it impacts on the other part. If us blokes spend all our time providing, come home exhausted, don't look after ourselves, but also look after the relationship, then things are going to start to break down.
And so, what I feel like I'm an expert in, I'll say, is P number 2, power, reaching optimal health. I know a lot about diet, and I know a lot about exercise, and I know a lot about self-development and things like that. In your field, what are some things that dads can do along the self-care aspect to be better dads, to be better partners? What are the things they can do is there something that you might be able to recommend on a daily basis to give them a tangible something to work with?
Yes, I might answer that question I'll give the long answer if I may.
Sure.
If you could draw a big circle and divide that circle up into 3 different quadrants. One quadrant is ourselves, the other quadrant is our relationships with our partner and our family, the other quadrant is work. And they're all interconnected. If one quadrant isn't travelling well, it's going to impact on everything else. A lot of us blokes from our childhood don't have a very good sense of self, sense of identity. So we look outside ourselves to feel good from the outside in. So if we do a job that we love, that we feel validated, that we have a sense of purpose, then we feel good. But a lot of guys listening will be doing a job they're not passionate about, will be doing a job they don't particularly like, sometimes feel like they're a little white mice on the treadmill, just providing for their family, and one day leads to the next, like Groundhog Day. And that starts to impact negatively on their sense of self. The other thing we often do, the other quadrant, we look, if we're not travelling well in ourselves, we look to our partners for that positive reflection of self. And when she looks at us with those eyes of care and love and concern, we feel good. But when after children, especially when they're tired, when they're exhausted, when they don't want, sex anymore, and guys often want sex to connect, and women need to feel connected before they feel like sex. So often he comes home expecting sex, she's tired, she says no, he feels invalidated, then that can impact on the sense of self. Suddenly he's not getting those eyes of love and care and respect anymore. And we all know that long work hours impact significantly on the relationship, and relationship stress impacts significantly on work. So everything is connected to everything else. So for the guys listening, it's really important to take stock of all those different quadrants. How do I feel about myself? Am I travelling okay? Do I need to go and have a chat to someone about issues that are bubbling away? Do I need to start an exercise regime? What do I need to do to look after myself? Is my work travelling okay? Am I happy in the work that I'm doing? Because if you're not, it's going to impact on your relationships and your sense of self. And how is my relationship? Are we traveling at optimum level of functioning, or are we feeling a bit disconnected from each other, and what do I need to do to disconnect? So I guess it's looking at all those different things: power, purpose, parenting, and passion, and in the context of, have I got that with my work? Have I got that with my relationships, with my children and my partner? And have I got that with myself?
That was go back and listen to that a few times, guys. that was a great answer. Thanks for that. I'll try and break that down a little bit in the show notes for you guys for some questions to self-reflect. To I guess what you're saying is, when you go through that, is really to find out where you are first of all. Find out.
Yeah, absolutely. Kind of just take a step back and take that stock take, because if you're not travelling well, and it gets to my first point, that us blokes tend to disconnect from ourselves and disconnect from the people around. So when we're not travelling well, we'll try various coping strategies. If we're isolating and disconnecting from our partners, family and children, that's not going to travel well. It's going to cause problems long term. If we're starting to drink more or use other substances or gamble or use addictions as a way to cope, to feel good, we're not going to really be travelling well. So they're often the warning signs to look out for is if I'm not sleeping well, if I'm starting to drink a little bit more, if I'm starting to spend longer at work when really I know I should be coming home, that's the time to do that deeper reflection.
Yeah, so basically trying to fulfill a void with something that could work in the short term but is destructive to our relationships with our significant other and our kids.
Absolutely. It's a coping strategy, but in the long term, it tends to disconnect. The interesting thing when you look at marriages, especially in Australia, 70% of marriages are initiated by the female partner. 70% of women initiate separations and divorce. Is it because we don't care? Of course we care as men. But do we tell our partners about our struggles? Do we tell our partners about how hard it is? Most men start to disconnect. As soon as the going gets tough and we do get those eyes of disregard and disrespect because our partners are not happy, often we don't know how to deal with that, so we disconnect, leading them to start to feel very isolated and alone in the marriage and start to go through their grieving process. So while some of those strategies might work in the short term, in the long term, they can be very detrimental. And I very much talk to guys, be careful at providing for our families at the expense of our families. And if there's any FIFO, fly-in, fly-out workers there working away long periods of time, really look at, is it worth being away from your family for so long? Talk to your partner about the appropriate length of time. And if she's saying it's time to come home, then it's time to come home.
Mm. Yeah, because I'll circle back to something you said earlier that it's something that was a real sort of hit home situation for me or whatever is like when it comes to sex, men use sex to connect, whereas women use sex when they already feel connected. And that's like a real dichotomy there where when we're feeling isolated, we want sex to feel validated, but then women are almost the exact opposite. They want to be validated, and then when they feel that, they'll want the sex.
Absolutely. And there's an old story about when you first meet a woman, you're a manager of two departments, the sex department and the romance department, and you really manage both really well. But after a while, when the kids come along, you kind of give up on managing the romance department and just focus on the sex and wonder why why there's no sex, because if a woman doesn't feel loved or valued or nurtured or respected or supported, the last thing she wants to do is to have sex or to make love. When as soon as she says no, then we as men tend to feel rejected. It cuts to the heart of our rejection buttons, our blame and shame buttons that we have very early on. And then a lot of guys act in an angry way or a hostile way to that rejection, making her less likely to want sex. And therefore couples very quickly develop this negative spiral and a marked loss of intimacy in their relationships.
That's a big take-home point there. I like it, the romance department. I might need to step my game up there.
Yes. Start managing it, or start managing it and dust the cobwebs off a little bit.
Exactly. And, I think we've got some really amazing stuff here so far with both working with relationships with yourself, with your partner, and with your kids. Is there any other, like a take-home, something that you can work on, again, maybe on a daily basis with your kids, to just increase that level of being vulnerable, being emotionally available for them? Is it something that, I with my little girl, every night when I put her to bed, I'll read her story, sing her a song, and then I'll go through like a little affirmation with her. And I'll say, you can do anything you want. You can have anything you want. You can be anything you want. And I get her to repeat that. And then I say, I love you. And I get her to say that back. And then I say, I love me. And I get her to say that back. It's not quite the same as being emotionally available and sort of telling them situations when you're not feeling as good. But I think, as a sort of a bedtime routine, I want her to know that she's loved, and I want her to view herself as worthy of loving herself as well. Can you have anything that listeners might be able to add to that, or something of your own?
That's very beautiful. And having those kind of bedtime rituals are really, really important. We just have to look at the research, say, on reading. If a father reads to their children in those first 3 years regularly, it impacts very significantly on their literacy and numeracy scores and their ability to take up reading later on. Also, there's been a lot of an Australian researcher called Richard Fletcher from Newcastle University has done a lot of research on rough and tumble play and the benefits of playing. And girls love a bit of rough and tumble in the early years too. When it's done in a very safe way and in a structured way, your 2-year-old you're lying on the floor on the mattress, and 2-year-old might jump on you and you push them off and they jump on you and they giggle. What that's actually doing is teaching them to regulate their emotions, teaching them to escalate, teaching them to de-escalate. And it's done, and when it gets out of hand and someone maybe gets hurt and you go, okay, it's time to stop now, it actually teaches them to de-escalate. Studies on children that haven't had rough and tumble play show that as they get older, especially boys, they find it very difficult to regulate, and there's no off switch. So when they start to get angry or emotional, they can't tend to bring themselves down. So simple strategies like simple rituals like that actually have so many benefits, cognitive and emotional benefits for our children. I've always been one helping guys to actually play, to get into the child's imaginative world and play with your 2-year-old or 3-year-old, but don't go into competition. it's if you go to the beach, often you'll see a guy building a sandcastle with their child, and then it becomes the father's sandcastle, and he's kind of taken ownership, and he's trying to build the biggest sandcastle, and we kind of instinctively go into competition, us blokes. But if you can hold that and do child-led play, so your child is leading, especially a 2, 3, 4-year-old, their world is a very deep, rich fantasy world, and they can make very elaborate games. And if you go into that world as a participant, you can do all sorts of play with them, and they will find that so connecting and bonding.
And is that like my little girl's 6.5? I do that kind of stuff with her all the time. Is that just as good at that age, but even better at the? Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, absolutely. And then their needs change. So my 13-year-old's very different than my 5-year-old. So it's my 13-year-old tends to like building websites and coding. So I go into his world rather than expect them to go into my world and take up my hobbies and interests. I tend to be fascinated and interested about what they're into, and they find that very, very connecting and very bonding.
Yeah, get involved with what the kids enjoy. I think that's a good takeaway message there. Time flies. We have basically come to the end of time for today's interview. So I'm going to thank you so much. There's so much take home there. I reckon dads will definitely go back and listen to this episode 2 or 3 times. So I'll try and do it some justice with the show notes, guys, but definitely re-listen to this. Simon, how can people get in touch with you?
It's just you can look up my website at www.menandfamilycounselling.com.au, or just phone me on 0411 144
So is it Men and Family Wellness, or Men and Family Counselling.com.au?
Yeah, that's probably the best way to reach me on through the website.
Yeah, because there's international listeners. I just had a look at some of the stats, and we've got over 30 countries around the world that are listening at the moment. So pretty cool stuff happening with the Wake Up Dad show.
I know we're about to finish, so I'll just leave you with a brief story.
Sure.
One of my passions is I went on because I worked for many years with abused kids and teenagers. I kind of took a sabbatical and went overseas for 4 months on the Camino de Santiago pilgrimage through North Spain. I walked 900 kilometres. And through that pilgrimage, I met men from all around the world. And I was going to leave this profession, and I'd lost heart at that time and do something else. But after I sat down with men from all around the world, from North America, from South America, Asia, all the European countries, I realised that most of us men from all around the world, we all have similar issues about wanting to be closer to our fathers, similar issues to wanting to father differently, and sometimes, unfortunately, ending up fathering the same as we were fathered, similar issues with relationships. So that's what led me into the work that I do. So for those of you that are listening all around the world, us blokes, we all are on a similar journey.
Yeah, I agree, and I found an old proverb that said, for men to achieve their dreams, they must first wake up. And I think this is a wake up call for a lot of dads out there to realize what might be going on, and to help realize what their dreams are. And I think that realization that you're not alone, and that the issues that you're going through, a lot of us have gone through the same thing to one degree or another. So reach out to Simon. He's got an amazing practice here in the Gold Coast. if you want to get in, go into further detail about this with him. He's a brilliant therapist. So thank you so much, Simon. Go ahead.
And I might just do a quick plug. I do a lot of training in this area, helping organisations work with men better. We're doing couple workshops on he said, she said, understanding the gender differences, understanding each other in more effective ways. So I run a lot of workshops. So if you're interested in hearing more, then look at the website and contact me through that. Thanks very much, Scott, for having me on.
Thank you so much, Simon, and thank you, dads, for listening. Get in touch with me, www.thewakeupdadshow.com, and share this with other dads out there, guys. I'm sure this episode has brought up a few take-home points, so please share this with other men out there so that we can all become better dads together. Cool, man. That was awesome.
I didn't get to the wee. There was so much other stuff.
I know. I will definitely get you back on the show because the few things that I thought for sure, I was like, okay, I'll get him to do this and this. We didn't do any of it. So, but I'd love to get you back.
Was that good? That was
brilliant.
What you were looking for?
Absolutely. That was absolutely great. So I really think I just had I got together with a few guys on Saturday night to play some poker. And a friend of mine brought a few of his mates that I'd never met before, and they're part of a men's group here on the coast, and just the wording that they would use and the way that they were talking to each other was different. So it was really cool to see that it's growing out there to learn more about how to be just a better man.
Well, that was I came through men's wellbeing and the men's groups and facilitated them for many, many years. But what I found is after a while they became almost a culture unto themselves with that language. I got a feel into it, and very kind of, and it wasn't connecting with the average bloke, where my office is. Yep. The guys across the road at Wallaby's pub, those guys sitting on the balcony there. It wasn't connecting, so that's when I set up Men and Family, because I really wanted to connect with the average bloke that hadn't done much work but was starting to lose their way.
Yeah.
And if I could then connect with them in a very kind of honest, upfront, masculine, blokey way, then after a few sessions, then I often refer them to the men's groups.
Yes, yeah, I see what you're saying. It's just too big of a step to start.
For a lot of blokes, yes.
Yeah. All right. Well, thank you so much for your time. I will.
So could you send me the link so I can hear it?
Yep, absolutely. So I think this one will probably be released next week. So I will definitely send you the link so you can listen to it and you can share it on Facebook or whatever the case is.
Do you edit them at all, or do you put them as is?
For the most part, as is, unless something really weird happens. So I'll be doing very little editing to that. Like, I'll obviously just be editing out the beginning and the end of this part of the conversation that's not part of the show.
I'm just wondering, just edit out my phone number if you get a chance. It's probably better than getting me through the website, I'd say.
I'll just make a note of that before I go.
Because I know when I did Q&A, I was getting calls from all around Australia. It just went a bit nuts, and then I, all around Australia, and I was spending time counselling them, but there was no, there was no money. I was spending all this kind of time and effort, but not seeing anything out because I was too kind to go. Well, really, do you want me training?
Yes.
No, I just want to talk to you about my relationship for free.
Yeah, of course. If I can do it for free, why would I not do that? Yes, I can do that. I've highlighted that in my notes here to do that for you. That's no problem.
Right, fantastic.
Cool.
Thanks, Scott.
All right, we'll talk soon.
See ya. Bye.
Thanks. Bye.